hindering MSMEs in adopting energy efficiency. We will delve into issues like high energy costs and limited bankability due to informal practices, and potent solutions like energy savings insurance, the partial risk sharing facility, and the pivotal role of energy service companies. The conversations will span regulatory reforms, technological interventions, and innovative financing models, such as cash flow-based lending and alternative credit assessment data. For this session, we would like to thank our knowledge partner, Institute for Emerging Economics and Financial Analysis. Without further delay, let me introduce our esteemed panelists for the session. I would like to welcome you to please come up on stage as I announce your names. Ms. Neha Kumar, Head of South Asia Programs at Climate Bonds Initiative. She drives policy and partner programs in the country to scale up the green bonds market and supports advocacy with the media, investors, and the government. Next, I would like to introduce Ms. Namrata Mukherjee, Deputy Chief of Party, Trade and Investments at USAID SAREP. She's an Indian energy trade and investments expert with more than 19 years of experience leading market creation and competition efforts, private sector engagement for public-private partnerships, regulations and reforms, and regulatory development in South Asia. I would also like to welcome Mr. Rajiv Kumar, General Manager, Green Climate Finance Vertical, International Cooperation, SIDBI. Mr. Rajiv works with SIDBI, which is the principal financial institution of the Government of India for promotion, financing, and development of MSMEs. He comes with an experience of more than 32 years in the sector. Our next panelist is Mr. Amit Mande, Chief Revenue Officer at Ugrow Capital. He brings a rich career experience spanning over 22 years and is responsible for scaling the asset side of the business. We also have Mr. Shantanu Srivastav, a research lead, sustainable finance and climate risk at IFA. He specializes in the financing, policy, and technology aspects of the Indian electricity market. Next, we have Mr. Sishir Garamela, Head of International Business Development at PV Evolution Labs. He is an experienced business leader in the field of clean energy and climate finance and has done some pioneering work for the residential and small business solar market through his ventures. The session chair and moderator for this session is Mr. Upendra Bhatt, co-founder and managing director at C Kinetics. Mr. Upendra has over 25 years of industry and investment experience across India, Southeast Asia, and East Africa in renewable energy and resource efficiency domains. Welcome to the session.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, AEEE, for putting together this eclectic panel, and I hope we can do justice in the time accorded. We have some very experienced and I would say wise people on this panel related to the aspects that we intend to cover. In interest of time, I would not set the context, but I would try and share what I am hoping we will cover. What we are hoping to cover is looking at financing for MSME in context of both the demand and supply for energy efficiency and decarbonization projects, purely from the optics of how explicit is this demand, not the potential, how explicit is that demand, to what methods are needed to make these projects as bankable, what frameworks apply to make the savings or outcomes quite relevant so that one could look at programmatic interventions rather than individualistic interventions. How do we productize these projects, right? So that's the spectrum that I'm hoping through my fellow panelists we'll be able to cover. Let me start by requesting Rajiv ji. And I was joking with my fellow panelists that because we have SIDBI, which kind of is a development financial institution, but also a quasi market maker when it comes to MSME financing. We could actually cede the entire session to Rajiv ji and have him explain how do we create more SIDBIs. But let me put that out as a question, Rajiv ji, to you as to, given SIDBI's own experience with SME financing, what principles have you kind of extracted from that when you have tried to look at EE and decarbonization? Because you have attempted multiple programs from a capacity building, sensitization, awareness, clusters, etc., DCMSME partnership of SIDBI has been around for several interventions, but that doesn't necessarily created a domino effect at scale, right? So given where you are, you have a 6,000 odd crore book across wide spectrum of green initiatives, but within that in particular, if I look at E, how visible is that opportunity? How much effort is needed to create that book? And what would be your inputs to create many more regional players in this space?
Thank you. Good afternoon. First of all, I must thank AEEE and IFA for having me here. I mean, it was a last minute, almost kind of forced entry, and they could accommodate, and we are really grateful to them. Coming on to the question, SIDBI started financing energy efficiency in 2005-06 through lines of credit from JICA, KFW, AFD, etc. And since then we have been learning, making mistakes, learning, trying to improvise in the further our projects. So basically 3-4 ingredients if we have to lend to energy efficiency in MSME based on our learnings would be, number one, we have to keep it simple as possible for the MSME. I mean, if we talk to them with regard to detailed energy audits, then the measures, then MNV protocol and all those things, they will be put off. So it has to be very simple. We in fact tried many approaches, list-based approach, then energy audit-based approach also was followed, and similarly then again list-based. So the various approaches we have followed, and second is basically we have to sensitize our field officers. That is also very important, because they get a lot of proposals. One is technical energy efficiency, which they see as a highly technical proposal. Then they keep it aside and then they work on normal cases wherein not many compliances are required. So how to make the process very simple for the field officers was, so that's why what SIDBI did is we created a centralized system wherein centrally we are taking the technical burden on us. We are doing that technical evaluation with regard to projects, and then branches have to do only credit due diligence, which they normally do in respect of any other proposal. So for them it becomes very simple. So these two things are very important for energy efficiency. And third is updation of technology list from time to time. Yes, those 3-4 points will be very important.
Rajiv, a quick follow-on. Out of the 6,000 odd crore green portfolio, how much of it is EE financing?
E is almost...
Not as an implicit but explicit EE projects.
At least 50% is EE financing.
It is?
Yes.
And this includes PRSF, PACT, everything, all of those as
yes,
well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And a typical ticket size would be what of these loans for the 3,000 crore?
Between 50 lakhs to 1.5 crore. So many of these MSMEs actually, they do not go for complete change of their facilities. They pick up one thing at a time, one technology, machinery they will pick, and then go in for another. Yeah.
Just to close the picture on that, so what will be the typical tenure and, typical interest rate range?
5 years, typical tenure is 5 years, and it ranges from 3 to 7 years, with a moratorium of up to 18 months. That again depends on the project to project, how much the moratorium. And the interest rate are highly concessional. Presently, the rate starts at 7% and goes up to 9.5%.
Got it.
Exact rate decided based on the credit rating of the borrower.
Got it. Oh, thank you. Just taking from there, Amit, Ugrow obviously has been an SME-focused lender, and aggressively growing at that over the recent times. Just looking at the data points that Ajit just shared, I'm just wondering, a 3 to 7 year tenure essentially would cover a wide gambit of EE projects in this country. And yet, while 3,000 crores seems an interesting number, but if you look at it in context of the size, scale, and number of years that this portfolio has got aggregated, it doesn't necessarily create a whole lot of momentum for large scale folks to come in, particularly financiers. Equity guys may still come in to some extent, right? So what is your rationale for going, number one? Where are you seeing opportunity and growth, and in the next 24 months, what kind of book you're visualizing only on the E side? Because, if we integrated renewable, etc., then we are looking at a different spectrum.
So,
just one other color to that, Amit. And the second part of it is, more often than not, the demand from MSMEs comes when they are looking for paybacks of 1 to 2 years on technologies, etc. So how do you bridge that when structuring your financial offerings?
So I'll first, before we start, I think Ugrow is a micro and small enterprise lender. So when we are servicing the demand, it's prima facie. E is still one, but largely it's green asset financing at the very small MSME. You're right at this point of time that there are not many lenders in the space. Prima facie because of the risks that the lenders see, whether it is the E or whether it is green asset financing. The lenders don't understand, and if I may use the harsh word, they're pretty ignorant about the asset risk that comes about.
But is there demand? Is the question.
So the demand will there is a lot of buzz around. There is everybody in this country, including the Prime Minister, talking about having rooftop solars in the country. How many are actually adopting it today? I think it's also a function of how is the regulator, the government, the other agencies that are responsible educating the end consumer about availability, ease of availability of the business, the real paybacks, like you said, and availability of possible credit because it cannot be an incremental burden. No micro or small medium entrepreneur is saying that, okay, I will have an incremental burden to go green. He has no fancy about this. If there is a payback, a quick payback, and then there is an additional go green initiative, only then it is. So it's all about education and making it feasible for the micro SME, and then the demand will come in. Very quick reference, there is something happening in the heartland where there is a government initiative that they want to put 25,000 rooftop solars in next 90 days in Varanasi. There is a body which is going door to door and preaching this. Now, this kind of preaching will surely see suddenly an uplift in the demand in these markets. But if you go to a neutral market, I don't think that there is so much buying in the micro and the small space.
Got it. Let me take from that very, very grounded perspective, Namrata, and go to you, since in your current role, a lot of it is capacity building, but essentially feeding into programmatic demand creation efforts and mechanisms, right? Or use of or design of market mechanisms to enable growth of markets. Our default position, more or less, always has been government should be a market-making entity, and government should also then de-risk the investor who's
investing in the market making. So government is actually on both sides of the transaction, directly or indirectly. And then we crib about the systemic risk. Outside of that one model, which I think we are very good at, what are other approaches to convert this potential? Because there are thousands or millions of MSMEs. Because if I go by Amit's definition of micro, then the definition expands considerably. What can we do different in converting and creating real demand and doing it in a form and shape where it can also be addressed?
Okay, thanks so much, Upendra. Just as a background, we are USAID South Asia Regional Energy Partnership Program, which is a technical assistance program. Helping and financing is one of our verticals, where we are looking at how development capital assistance can help them, entities look at raising capital or accessing, international capital sources. So I'm just going to focus on that bit, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience, in this program and what types of solutions can be thought of. So one innovative area that we were working on, and because you've asked us all to focus on energy efficiency, is energy efficiency really, I mean, the entire game is in the, I would say in the MSME sector, because that's where innovation, technology, all the drive really resides there, if you look at it as a sector, right? And financing for MSME, I mean, we can keep going on. It's humongously difficult, right? So we can't have one approach for financing of MSMEs. I think that we should make it very clear. And like you said, SIDBI has been one of the front runners. How do we look at replicating or looking at other innovative models so that there's play for more financing agencies looking at more innovative, models for financing? One such approach was we were working with a small NBFC whose clientele is basically these kind of small startups bringing in innovative technologies. One portfolio is energy efficiency, right? And they were looking at ways of creating a fund which could source an international capital and possibly look at blended finance sort of structures within that fund. And some of you may be aware, Government of India has this scheme called the Alternate Investment Fund, which allows a lot of flexibility with the sponsor putting in a small amount of capital and then raising international capital to build that fund. And this was a debt AIF that we were looking at. And we had progressed quite a bit in getting a lot of interest just basis the portfolio of energy efficiency projects, programs that we were going to support through this initiative. But the only bottleneck that we got stuck was the concessional capital has to come in a form which is like a first loss, literally to protect the risk, which can come out because of a potential default, right? And a fund will only make sense if there is some concessionality in its form, right? Not in the true form of cost of capital being the same as any other banker lends at. And there is where we hit a bottleneck, because RBI came out with a regulation in 2022 which said that you can't give differentiated returns to a class of investors when you're looking at raising capital for an AIF. Which would mean that if I have impact capital from philanthropies willing to come into my fund, who can take a differential return because of the objective which with philanthropy capital comes in, right? We couldn't structure that because you can't give differentiated returns, right? We tried other things then, and then we were hit by another regulation last year. I think all of you know about it, which is basically that an AIF can't downstream lend to its own, borrower. So all I'm saying is there are ways of working around the current mechanisms that we have, but we need to work together as a sector, the financing regulators, institutions, as well as, very focused sectors like ours, which need that kind of support to have more innovative financing models come in place. I'll pause there because I know you're keeping a check on the time, but I have two other points, to throw up from a demand creation perspective. If you're okay, I can take up one of them.
No. Why don't we focus on the demand creation? I have follow on from what you said, but
Sure. So, and the other idea, thought, so we are not working on this under the development project, I must say, but that's more of an idea that I have, is I think we are one of the unique countries who has energy efficiency based market mechanism in the form of PAT. I'm not going to go into whether it's an ideal, whether it's the best, whichever way. But because we work in the region, we look at a lot of regional countries interested in looking at how, PAT has worked and how it can help in, creating this market for energy efficiency. One idea is, why don't we strengthen, there have been 2-3 cycles of PAT already, why don't we strengthen that and sort of expand it slightly towards the MSME segments, which are energy intensive, right? I mean, I'm talking about, say, foundry or, steel components, etc., which we can then, bring in within the purview of PAT, which can automatically create a demand. So I'll pause.
Yeah, I mean, there could be a role of the carbon markets in enabling that through another ways as we expand, but we'll come to that. I get the larger point there, but the earlier point that you were making, Namrata, was essentially more going to impact more NBFCs than the MSMEs, essentially. And maybe SIDBI will be kept out of the purview because you are fund of funds and also a favored entity with the government. So maybe the RBI fiat will not. But that gives me the segue to ask Shishir, not perhaps wearing your current hat, but in your past avatars, you have tried to create similar structures, etc., etc. I'm still wondering, frankly, I believe all structures are responses to the nature and form of demand that exists. This very country saw 20 years back a vibrant ecosystem emerge in microfinance where till that time it was deemed to be a sector where private capital will never return a dollar. And we saw VC deals, we saw private equity deals till government played spoilsport in Andhra in 2008. We saw it come back, re-emerge. We saw another cycle during COVID, and we have seen people continue doing well, right? But there the demand was well set. It has been ongoing through an SHG model and other forms for many, many decades, but essentially that was there. What, from your experience of creating those platforms, did you see was missing in the manner in which demand was emerging? That you felt that it's not worth your time as an entrepreneur to continue down that path because, that's the learning there.
Right. So thanks. That's a great question, the way you framed it. And I can draw parallels to microfinance to give you exactly where are the gaps. Number one, how many people here have rooftop solar on their home?
Maybe the question should be how many people have access to their own roofs? No, because we throw this number of 650 gigawatts, and anybody who has done a thorough micro building analysis will tell you there are severe limitations to that number. But
in the interest of time, my next question would have been how many people know at least one person who has rooftop solar, and everybody would have raised their hands up. I wouldn't do that. But my point is that unlike microfinance, solar or energy efficiency demand is a choice. It's a luxury. It's not a necessity. Let's start with that first, right? Second, even if I don't go solar today, nothing's really harming me. But if I choose to go solar, it'll be beneficial to me, right? So I think the neediness of the customer, how badly do they want something, is number one. Number two, which I found the hardest. Number one, you can solve for, but you can really push hard and all of that, was India is not India as a country. India is 30 different states. Each has a regulation, each has a culture, each has a credit culture, sales culture, all of that. So one of the hardest things that we realized was demand aggregation. I was just joking with Amit that we got 89 loans for him and they rejected 88 of them for the fact that they don't cover an industry or they don't cover a certain city. We were a little outside of a certain geography. So can you find 1 million people who want energy efficiency MSMEs in India? Yes. But are they all aggregated in certain parts of a city where doing business is easy? Answer is no. So you'd have 3 rice mills in East Andhra, 4, in Guntur, you would have some mirchi farmers. Like that, you spread it out. Demand, of course there is demand on paper. But there's cost of doing business, so the transaction cost increases. So I think that's my second biggest learning, is that you have to have demand at an aggregated place. Even someone like Bajaj Finance runs only in very specific cities because they've mapped their market and they know exactly what kind of loan that they want to give. And then they'll cross-sell every other loan possible once the loan is given and there is a behavior seen. So from a demand perspective, these are 1 or 2 issues. And I'll just draw a quick parallel to microfinance, is that because it's not a product that you are willing to pay for, it's a choice, right? At least at my time, and now maybe things have changed after Prime Minister's announcement, is that you could wait and say all the things that SIDBI is slow and SBI is slow and still wait for that 8.5% loan. than to come to someone like us at 14%, right? And that is not something that we are willing to wait for. Also, I might also want to say that you cannot be in one regulation because regulatory rules in India change. Shantanu and I were just talking about the Delhi policy now. You've heard, you're smiling, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, if you're only a Delhi-focused player, I am rooftop solar only in Delhi. I know everybody here, there's a lot of pent-up demand here, right? Now, if the policy changes, what happens to my business model, right? Now, I open 3 such Delhis in India. Only one of the 3 might have targeted demand as well as regulation. So there's a lot of moving parts. We haven't even gotten into financing, the liability side of the business. But on the asset side of the business, you're winning when you're close to your customer. But you can only be close to your customer when you have a lot of business coming from one place.
Okay. I will have a follow-on question. I'll give you some time to reflect on that. How did that demand materialize in telecom when it was a 8/16/32 price offering when we first started? But we failed to get paging going, which was at 3 rupees. Hold on to that,
Yep.
we'll come back to that. Because I personally believe, having spent and also invested our own money, and we were joking about it, when did we start? I said it started on the day I decided I want to lose money, right? So I strongly believe the camel's back on this needs to be broken, as you rightly pointed out, Shishir, to the manner in which you do demand aggregation and the manner in which you originate deals. Because till that does not happen, no amount of global structuring, etc. would help. You will have money sitting in Rajivji's desks, but he might put 500 more people on the ground, but that's not going to solve the problem. But I do want to build on what Shishir said and Abad said, and go to you, Shantanu. I mean, IFA as an analyst has been looking at several elements in this landscape, in this rapidly evolving landscape of technologies. Many of these businesses have been around for a long time. They follow the rules of what those particular industry verticals entail. So now when you're trying to marry that with the sustainable finance ecosystem and trying to say these are the transition, what are the frameworks or approaches that you see are relevant, if any? Or do we just need to go back to the basics and say the SME financing itself needs to be intermediated in a different fashion if we are serious about getting any of this out? Whether it is from a pricing point of view, whether it is from on-lending structures, because you cannot have SIDBs and the public sector banks be more nimble or as efficient as Amit talked about these 25,000 rules getting. So somebody has to put that together. DCM SME has tried these aggregation approaches and failed to scale them up. Right? So.
First of all, thank you so much, AEEE, for having me over here with such an eminent panel. A bit about IFA. IFA is the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis. We are a US-based think tank. We cover 34 markets globally. And we cover, in India, or rather South Asia, we cover the policy, finance, technology aspects of the energy markets. Now when you talk about sustainable finance, it has a bit of a nuanced meaning, right? It is the market for instruments such as green bonds, green loans, sustainability linked bonds, transition bonds, all of these, right? In the context of MSMEs, right, we know that these instruments or mechanisms are not at all accessible to them, right? They're not able to access bank financing from the likes of NSBI. We cannot expect them to go and access these instruments from the global sustainable finance markets. But the use of these instruments in the context of MSME financing is through the intermediaries. Now the intermediaries over here as the financial institutions, the banks, NBFC, microfinance institutions. So the ability of these intermediaries to be able to tap into the global sustainable finance markets by raising these instruments such as green bonds or transition bonds or green loans, and then identifying assets, energy efficiency assets within different use cases, within different sectors, and financing them. That is the way this is. We'll be able to actually channel this global pool of capital that is aligned towards sustainability into MSME energy efficiency. Now, if you see in India, we've had banks such as right from Yes Bank, which issued the first green bond in the country, to SBI, to L&T Finance, to even Shriram Finance. All of them have tapped into the sustainable finance market by raising some of the other instrument, right? But if you see, and just talking about green bonds, because these are the most issued instruments in the Indian context, more than 90% of those user proceeds for green bonds have been used to finance renewable energy. The reason is that there is no gray area in terms of the mitigation potential for a renewable energy asset, right? And mostly this has been grid scale solar and grid scale wind. But when you talk about something like an energy efficiency, right, the energy saving potential might be very context specific to the specific location or the facility of an MSME, right? Now, when you look at the mitigation potential, and you have, as part of your green bond issuance, you have to report on what is the mitigation benefit that you've had. And there are certain benchmarks and thumb rules on the basis of which you can calculate that this is the capacity and this is going to be the mitigation potential, and then you report that to your investors. That's not as simple as that in energy efficiency, right? But end of the day, that verification and ability to verify and report on what is the energy saving happened at the ground level across all the different assets that you have financed, getting that verified, getting that reported, and that's a difficult task. So while an SBI has a $10 billion loan book for energy transition in the country, just 650 crores is for energy efficiency, right? Because it's not very easy to finance those assets through the sustainable finance markets. So what do we need? We definitely need some sort of, first of all, SIDBI has that impaneled list of assets, right, which could be financed through SIDBI or through other banks, but that have to be married, or that have to be mapped to use of proceeds that are internationally accepted as eligible in the context of green loans or green bonds, right? So that mapping has not been done from an Indian perspective. We do not have a taxonomy, right? If we do not have a taxonomy, we do not really know exactly what is green and what is not green from an energy efficiency perspective. Secondly, it's very important to ensure that verifiability is happening. Now, that verifiability at a very disaggregate level from an MSME, you cannot expect an SBI to send energy auditor to each and every MSME and understand what is the energy saving that is happening. That is a very big overhead for them, and that's not a cost that they're ready to burn. So there has to be some regulatory mechanism, either mechanism or some kind of a stop from the government that provides the cost for that kind of a verification from a third party, right? So I think those are some of the bottlenecks that are being faced, but definitely globally also energy efficiency is being financed through this market, and there are mechanisms that are developed in other parts of the world, and we can definitely leverage from them and learn through some of those, and then help our intermediaries to tap into them and finance energy efficiency.
So, Shantanu, essentially you're talking about measurement and verification as the bedrock for this, and I'm wondering, in context of green buildings, there has been a talk, Satish just left the room, but we have been having this discussion on and off around, should we move towards a design-based compliance regime, and then you have significant penalties or whatever in case you don't deliver, right? And you kind of, because we are a digitized nation today, if we really want to use this, that's the most efficient and effective way. You're already seeing that happen in some of the industrial wastewater zones, etc., where that's how it is getting reported, tracked, etc. I'm wondering, does that then give the comfort with that data? Because essentially what it does is it makes a set of, in absence, with or without a taxonomy, a set of technologies, user specific, context specific, and essentially allows you to do a deemed savings outlook and assess the project like that. Because essentially that's how deemed savings projects are done. You have an implicit understanding that this technology VFD will do this, correct? And you are saying now in that catalog versus trying to do a very strong baseline and then an M&V protocol and then getting, which is what makes the transaction cost extremely expensive and perhaps disproportional to the whole effort, and right, not just in terms of money but also the time and the. So I'm just wondering, Shantanu, does that kind of approaches allow for a change?
Definitely, and I think BE has such a stack of assets, right?
No, they have technologies. I'm talking about the manner in which you go about it, and I'll come to you because I know this is core to what you and I discussed. You should be sharing about. But just I'm just trying to push the envelope here. We have always tried about an M&V, and we have failed. Yeah. IEEE has been the pioneering agency with M&V training in this country. But if there is no demand for that in a form and shape that is easily absorbable,
that knowledge doesn't get deployed. And if it doesn't get deployed, it doesn't help the market to grow. So I'm just curious, since you talked about the M&B part, you can reflect on that, Shantanu, if you want to think over, we can come back to you. But that's where. Neha, just same question to you to start with, right? Because essentially, I don't think this segment is ready for bonds in any form, green or otherwise. You could have green loans with some assurance conditions, but you are still going back to in what form does the demand come where the transactions can be aggregated at a minimal price which is absorbable and respondable by the banking institutions, right? So what would be your thinking on that?
Thank you, Pedro. So not only is it a very eminent panel, we also have an extremely eminent moderator who brings us to reflect on questions. And thank you for asking all of these questions, because in some ways they are new thinking into the same old problem, right? Which we have been trying to solve for last, at least from when I started working, 20 years. Okay, and if you allow me, I will give you an example, because somebody talked about foundry clusters, and every problem has been already mentioned over here. When I was in my earlier avatar working with German Development Agency, we were working together with SIDBI, and we were trying to look at practices at MSME level, even micro enterprise level. And what I found over there was that there are certain approaches which will work if there is a continued concerted effort from a variety of actors. For example, cluster approach is the one that works. The other thing that works with MSMEs is you have to get hold of one MSME promoter or micro promoter who wants to bite that bullet once, you know. So for foundry clusters, we found that the moment there was one or two promoters who came forward, because there was no baseline at all, they started finding the benefits in energy efficiency or shifting their technology very, very quickly. So the other people join. This is a point that I'm making, that demonstration actually can be very, very effective way of finding where the aggregation is possible and how the demand can be created. So when everybody talks about aggregation, yes, we have been talking about demand, but where to create that aggregation is extremely important. And here I would say that the role of policy is also very important. You know, so we talk about MSMEs, which form about 30 to more than 35% of our industrial output. They contribute nearly 110 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, you know, so it's huge, right? So what are those policies that will create a demand? I think procurement policies are that one feature which we have to really, really look at, whether that is, you know, in steel sector or industrial sector. We've been talking about that, but we really have to see where the demand can be created. So there is a policy question. Second, I think we have to see that does climate or green actually create an impetus to do something differently from what has happened till now? Otherwise, we are just tweaking. We will keep on going back to the same thing, you know. And here I come to standards, and here I come to standardization, you know. So for example, you asked about buildings, right? What will create this? There are at least 6 to 7 multiple standards on buildings which account for green in a different manner in India. They could be applicable to commercial, residential, or both. And then there is a, you know, an international standard, say, which people like Climate Bonds put out. We have, because we work with investors and bankers, when we started interacting, and this has been 6 years, 6 years ago, big banks found it transactionally extremely cumbersome to go through their loan book to see which part of their loan book is actually complying to those standards. The story is still the same because we don't have these standards mapped, but there is something that we have been able to do. For example, recognize IGBC net zero building standard, create a proxy, and then make it at least interoperable from the point of view of investor, that they're talking about net zero and that they will take a linear approach, you know. So there is something that can be done over there. The third, I will just simply focus on certain regulations and mandates, or which will lead to certain incentives, because without that will not happen. That will influence our banking sector, and the idea whether you can easily link it to capital markets or not, because I think we really have to keep our eye on that. Yesterday, Reserve Bank of India came out with its draft guidance. And this is important, right? SEBI has come out with a set of regulations. All of these are important. Yeah, there is also an effort to do something called a light version for MSMEs. All of these things are important. What did RBI say yesterday? They said that both risk plus opportunities plus absolutely an important role for DFIs in creating transition plans, all of that should, because we have a time frame now, you know, by next year it will all start getting applied. That very visible regulatory push will influence lenders to do their business in a slightly different manner, and verifiable manner and a measurable manner. I think that is required when you want to give it a push. I think now at least the regulators have shown, even though the policymakers have been lagging behind in terms of putting a taxonomy together, at least the regulators are clear that it needs to be done. So we will see action, and that will push. So I'm talking about a push factor for demand creation. Pull factor, the moment they I think the pull factor will also get aggregated, if I could put it like that.
No, great points, Neha, and I think that sets us on to the next round of conversations on this panel. Rajiv, with you in particular, what Neha said, that there is a way forward to create that demand to green procurement guidances, aggregation at a cluster level, etc. Assuming that starts fructifying at scale, I go back to the point you made around that you have credit ratings, etc. Now, in this whole universe of MSMEs, barring the top 5 to 10%, they would not necessarily qualify as per the regular conventional credit ratings, correct? So how do we get them to be part of this? And what approaches have you been adopting as SIDBI to, kind of enable these MSMEs in transitioning?
Yeah, I mean, besides having the financial schemes, concessional financing schemes, we are parallelly working on the developmental initiatives, and many of them we are working in many micro and artisan-based clusters, so as to sensitize them, handhold them for making the transition. Like in Muradabad, in Kota, Bihar, various clusters, we have been there. We have been sending consultants who are, for a period of around 18 months or so, they have been doing number of workshops, sensitizations, and then supporting them for transition. So, besides financing, I think these kind of developmental initiatives, working in clusters, aggregating the demand in clusters would also help. Secondly, with regard to, as you very rightly said, that not everybody will be passing through these various filters, the rating filters and others. For that, while SIDBI has a program wherein, but I think other players, the NBFCs and other players, we are also working with smaller NBFCs, particularly in the area of e-mobility and others, wherein we are helping them to provide sufficient liquidity so that they can go and lend to those segments, even if it is at a slightly higher cost. So yeah, I'll stop.
Yeah, no, I think SIDBI has a very, very critical role to play in building out the ecosystem, and I think the manner in which you have rolled out your e-mobility partnerships, if we can replicate that even in 4 or 5 industrial MSME focusing or even building sector, I think it will be a huge change.
just building off that point, Amit, how are you guys looking when you're engaging with this from a risk and your lending frameworks or your product design? Because some of it may be cash flow lending, some of it may be, equipment replacement financing where you're already, kind of looking at it. So I'm just curious, how do you go about it? How do you look at it in the conventional SME context?
So you made a statement, Upendra, that only 10% could be lendable, or 10,
I don't
15%.
know. You're
So,
right.
that has been the problem traditionally, because if you look at the credit gap in the MSME segment, it's only increasing. 90 lakh crores is the estimated credit gap today. Having said this, this is because the lending methodologies, there was never an intent issue, whether it was a lender, whether it was a regulator, whether it was the finance department. There was never an intent issue to deploy credit in the MSME sector. The issue was with the MSME itself, with respect to the disclosures, financial discipline, etc. So the financial papers and the business really couldn't correlate to each other. And that, of course, leads to a inability of a lender to deploy credit there. What has also happened in last 4 or 5 years is a complete evolution of a digital footprint of these MSMEs. Whether it started with DMON, then came the UPI moment, then came the GST, and now the account aggregator, which allows a lender like us, a new age lender like us, to look at these data points and therefore assess cash flows, not necessarily profitability, but cash flows, and therefore lend to these MSMEs. So that's the first part. So today when we lend, we only look at cash flows. So that's the first part of how the credit environment, the lending environment is changing. Having said this, is it still enough for us to deploy credit in these new age sectors, in green energy sector? I think even today, even when with these footprints, the apprehension is to how do you lend for a energy efficient or a green asset or a EV, and the answer always is that will somebody need to mortgage his house to put up a rooftop solar? The ability of the new age NBFCs to understand the asset, understand the viability of the asset, and therefore deploy credit without an incremental burden on the MSME is the real way forward. And that is what people like us are trying to do. But on the risk side, deploying credit is very easy. Assessing is very easy. The risks are completely changed. When we used to deploy credit in a secured lending, loan against property, the property is appreciating, the property is always there. There's a market that is got established, and tomorrow if there is the loss given default are almost zero. Here, today the risks are very different. We are lenders, we don't know this business, we don't know technology. I'm just generalizing, right? And so I don't know if the asset that I'm credit that I'm giving to deploy an asset today, will it be even relevant in next 3 years when my loan is 7 years? After 3 years, if the asset is not relevant, is this asset becoming a reason of default rather than covering for my default? This is the first risk. The second risk that we are saying, and whether it's energy efficiency or rooftop solars, is the execution risk. We might talk about large scale, and just large scale players, but at the ground level, these are the electricians who are doing this. Is there a way and methodology to standardize the execution and take away the execution risk? And I think SIDBI has played a very critical role in that part, and Mr. Rajivji should have mentioned that. I think a lot of heart in lending comes from the credit guarantee scheme that SIDBI does for this, and that is where the lenders are taking through. So, so to summarize, yes, the lending landscape is changing, the risks are different, but I think lenders are finding ways to get into this segment because this is going to be the future of.
Thank you, Amit. Those are some very, very interesting points that we can build on. Just moving to you, Namrata, I mean, and partly going back to the comment you made around PAD getting refined or enhanced for a broader coverage, etc., which was more as a market signaling mechanism to get the MSMEs to see the opportunity or create an opportunity for them to participate. There could be other ways, right? You could have tariff structures play that role from an electricity point of view. If you look at the steel re-rolling clusters in India, the ones in Punjab shut down, ones in Chhattisgarh flourished.
because overnight Chhattisgarh came with a new tariff policy which brought down the tariffs to 2 rupees. Punjab went up to 7 rupees because they gave agri-purpose free, right? And banks suffered in whatever form and shape. And people like us took a view, this is a segment which you should not invest in. But really, I'm just wondering, are there innovative methods which can then be a bit more market signaling in nature, which allow for MSMEs to be CEE as a coin, because as Shishir rightly pointed out, it's a good to have. If it doesn't require them to make too much effort and it saves them a buck now, not sometime in the future, they will say, be my guest. But if it requires them to serve you, and then you tell them sometime in the future you might get something, they're looking for a top line growth. They're not looking to maximize their margin money for a socialization of the general environmental equity. So how do you change that, or how do you balance that narrative?
So thanks, interesting question. I'm not a big believer of, regulatory tariff sort of driving, energy efficiency and energy savings per se. Also, one has to realize that the center of the piece, which is a regulated entity, is the distribution company. Okay, and the driver for the distribution company is never going to be energy savings, right? It will always look at maximizing its revenue, and
unless they come up with utility ESCO models.
That's the answer you've given yourself. But all I'm saying is, we'll have to look at cracking that piece rather than just depending too much on the tariff structures. One good development over the last couple of years has been this entire RDSS scheme moving towards smart meters, right? I mean, that's a very good place where we can start looking at data, because I think everything around energy savings hinges upon data. And what best source than to have it at a level where a distribution company reaches out to multiple, customers over there. And the data which comes in a smart meter can be, very beautifully, intelligently used to drive demand-based actions, right? Which can then nudge the regulator to look at time of use tariffs and look at demand response mechanisms. So I would say these are mechanisms that we should be moving towards, and keeping the DISCOM as the center of the piece for driving energy efficiency.
No, thank you. Just moving to you, Shishir. One, hopefully you have given some thought to the question I left you with, which was around demand. So if you can share some color, but more on a more serious note, building up what Amit talked around de-risking mechanisms, role of CGT, SME, etc. And linking it partly to what Namrata's observation was, that if we believe DISCOM will help enable or intermediate, unlikely. The answer we all felt about a decade back was ESCO markets will pick up in some form or shape, or energy management services will pick up, if I could look at a broader term. It's more or less got morphed into a renewable plus play at best, correct? So if we keep the renewable out of the mix, do you still feel these models there's a way forward for these models? Is there enough demand, or de-risking possible to make these relevant so that one could find a way of addressing or creating a bridge to this MSME potential?
Right, so I thought about the telecom question, and here's my answer. Which were the largest telecom companies that were there when it started and which have survived? If you look at the names, they are large family businesses that know how to work with the government. Today, if you look at energy space, the biggest, and I'm talking about
the largest one wasn't there at that point.
I understand it's an anomaly.
Which is Reliance. It didn't enter the telecom space.
It did not, but my point is that electrician on the last mile runs his business very differently than you run My biggest bane in this market has been that we think it's retail, tech-enabled, finance-enabled, service-enabled. No. It's a Sarkari infrastructure business, and you have to know how to manage that. There's nothing wrong, but there's a way you run that business. And if you don't know how to run that business, it's very difficult. Today, the largest solar installer in the country is Tata, and the biggest financier is SBI. So all of these things signal something that it requires a certain kind of player. The other thing is the delivery of services. When you have a project-based delivery, every individual roof or every factory where you're doing an MSME intervention is unique. But I'm telling you, EV is going to change that a little bit because it's a product. Be it Kashmir or Kanyakumari, the bike looks exactly the same. So the delivery is easier versus at least rooftop solar. I remember where every roof was different. Same with telecom. Once you have the bandwidth, you've bought your space, and then the delivery of that is largely dependent on whether you can get a a handset to somebody. So I think it requires a different kind of player to run a particular industry, and I think the kind of people who are working at the last mile for demand aggregation may not really know how to work with the, And speaking about the capital question that you asked, at least my experience of working with the financiers has been that it is extremely hard for a business to any entrepreneur in India to get debt in the first 3 years. Right? Sure, CGT MSE is a great scheme, but barring that, it is very difficult because people will like, it's a chicken and egg problem. Give me a 3-year balance sheet with profitability, right? And till you get there, you don't have the money to survive in the first place. So we have to build financiers who understand what Ugrow is doing or what VCs are doing. I was extremely happy to read about a piece of news media article the other day that Proparco is looking to work with climate VCs in India. Very important because all the development capital I've seen in India has come after commercialization. Then what form of development is that, right? And also if that money comes, it comes with so many bells and whistles that it's very hard to manage ADB money or World Bank money because you have things to do for them. You have your various reportings and measurements to do, which is not possible for a small company. So I think what SIDBI is doing or what Ugrow is doing, or for that matter, what a fintech would be doing for Ugrow in terms of originating using technology, right? I think these ideas need to be backed by the people who are willing to take that kind of risk. So that's a VC risk. It's not private equity, it's not development capital. So if we have interlinkages between, we use the word blended finance. I've never really understood what that really means. If the last mile is not, if there is no initiative for the last mile to be able to support that electrician there who wants to run his business, I'm sorry to speak on your behalf, but one of the great products is supply chain finance, because you can give that electrician a 2-month loan or a 1-month loan to finance something. So we need creativity. It's coming. We've seen it in other sectors, but we need it in energy efficiency as well. Until that doesn't come, having conversations in Delhi about big million-dollar, multi-million-dollar programs is never going to see the light of day on the ground.
Well, that takes me to probably the last question before I open up the floor. And this one gets directed to Neha, and I think it partly builds on what Shishir said and partly what we all spoke about previously around the role of the governments in market making, but also how do you link it to the last mile that Shishir was talking about. And then it comes down to subnational governments and cities because they have a vested interest in livelihood creation. MSMEs are the biggest sources of these jobs. We are running into a big crunch, right? We talk about this huge transition in the country. Unless our manufacturing goes from 12% to 20, 21%, a lot of this is going to lead to a social strife. You might, meet certain goals. So in that context, from your experience of working across the world, how do you see an opportunity of, if I can use that word, making E-oriented interventions and green procurement the core through the MSMEs of that particular subnational area?
Thank you for that question. And we have an existing example in India which only needs to be labeled green. It has already happened. And it is TNUDF. It's a pooled bond, $6.2 million way back in 2003. 13 ULBs got together for their projects on water sanitation and supply, which had the mitigation benefit or energy efficiency benefit of at least 25%. Okay, if I
yeah, but thing missing in that is there is no domino effect for the MSME scale up. That's the linkage I was hoping you can throw some light on.
So now, and where I'm coming to from this example is that's why I keep on saying that now it is 2.0 version. We will have to look at those opportunities and really make an effort. Can TNUDF or such examples actually be repurposed and redirected with a very sharp focus on certain measures and have the methodologies to put it out more. And I think that will require, again, the state level action with these aggregation platforms which already exist. In some states they do, in some states they don't. We have been engaging with state governments of at least 8 or 9 states. There is a huge, I would say, reasonably good amount of interest now, because now they have started doing something, you know, in terms of green, etc. The other thing is that at an individual municipal level, can one do? Again, one has to say that you expose them to an opportunity which is now, a lot of these activities are already green what they do, right? So last year, Upendra, we had a workshop of about 12 municipalities, and NAFID came in that workshop and they said that you do everything green, but now if you want benefit from us, you have to be better certifiably green. I will be an anchor investor in your thing. I will be able to give you credit enhancement which can bring your credit rating up a couple of notches. So there is now, at least from, again, you know, DFIs, there is that, I would not say push interest, right? They're urging the ULBs to do something, municipalities to do something, and as we speak, say Vadodara Municipal Corporation, it has actually taken the effort to build that system, you know, build that green bond framework. But till now, all the municipalities have come out and are self-labeled green bond issuances. They have been oversubscribed by a very impressive margin. Ahmedabad 13.1 times, yeah, recently. Indore 6.2 times. So there is, you know, what I'm trying to say is there will be 2 or 3 kinds of structures that come to my mind: individual issuances, aggregated issuances, DFI coming in with some blended finance. Whether that term is clearly understood or not, it is important. I would say that especially when it comes to the city level action or the state level action will become important, because if you can create a fund, because you will not be able to push your revenue base at the ULB level or at the municipal level beyond a point. You will have to create a fund, you'll have, which is escrowed, which brings all of these pools of capital, and then you know, invest itself into energy efficiency measures, plus others.
Unfortunately, that hasn't happened. Under the ESCO ecosystem enablement in this country, there is a BE pool which goes to the SDS in each of the states, and the states were supposed to match that ideally and create a ring-fenced fund, which has not happened for a variety of reasons across the states in this country. But that is the way to go. I agree with you. But let me try and close with that. Very, very difficult to summarize when we are looking at an issue where the current market, on one hand, looks full of potential, full of challenges, full of opportunity, and full of players willing to go into it, and yet we are not able to crack the solutions. But from what I could hear from my co-panelists, I can synthesize 5 broad areas, and I think AEEE should look at it, since we started out to build out the EE market and shift the paradigm on the EE conversation. One, I think engaging with the governments at scale to create demand aggregation. I think that came out quite closely in different forms. There have been some efforts at cluster levels, but rather than look them as sensitization approaches, you would need to do that to kind of make the deal sizes better. So perhaps one use of grant capital, rather than try and distort it through interest subventions, etc., could be just use that as a pool, get good quality projects, so that Amit's team can actually look at the projects rather than have 4 people sit down and create a wraparound for a solution. Right? The second one was the opportunity for innovation, both in the manner in which data on the deals get parsed, but more critically in the way the financial products get created. I think there's an opportunity, and where perhaps under SIDBI's leadership, there could be
similar partnerships as you're exploring for e-mobility to build it out at scale for other areas. Third aspect is MSMEs are critical to the growth of the country, and therefore our broader transition in many ways underlies an opportunity that all transition in SME is sustainable transition or contributing to sustainable transition. So if we can get some basic standards going and enabling collaborations to make that work, then you could have a pathway for doing it at scale. Of course, it might need de-risking, and as Shishir rightly pointed out, despite best intents, etc., it's difficult if you kind of just latch onto one mechanism for de-risking. And we still keep on talking about blended finance. Essentially, Shishir, I'm sure you're on the same boat as all of us. We are hoping that the risks are taken in an off-balance sheet ring-fence structure away from me. And that, as I used to tell people, only happens in the very first round, which is a friend, family, and fools round. So if you can do that, you can do it well. The last one, which I think is re-looking at the manner in which the demand gets intermediated. The ESCOs haven't necessarily evolved, and that's where opportunity, but I think perhaps looking at energy management holistically as an approach to look at it, and perhaps looking at it in 3-year periods, because that then overlays with what the financial products likely to be, are some of the themes that I think came out on this conversation. I think AEEE team would do well in following up with each one of these institutions in trying to see and build something out of it, Satish, I think. And hopefully by the next feed, instead of a 6,000 crore green book, we have a 6,000 crore EE book from Ugro, 60,000 crore from SIDBI, Shishir perhaps having launched another EE venture, IFA saying, you know, now this is the way to go. So good luck for that. Thank you. Mistake. I thought we have all the knowledge ourselves. Thank you for reminding me that, and we did make time for that. Any questions to the panelists? Unless our lunch has switched you guys off. The microphones. Perhaps. And his go off first. Please introduce yourself, your organization, and then the question.
Hi everyone, I am Anmol Mathur. I am a building performance consultant. I represent Co-Lead. It was a very interesting and enriching session because we have touched upon green buildings, in this whole conversation. One of the things that...
No, can I, sorry, in the interest of time, can we get to the question please? Because otherwise we will not be able to accommodate others. Sorry,
so the question that I want to ask is that if we compare this situation to scenarios in the US where there are tax incentives, and there's a lot of involvement of private equity funds rather than debt. How do you see that happening in India? Is that something too far-fetched, or we can probably shift the view from that angle instead of debt to equity?
Maybe Amit, you can, I can share from my experience, but
no. So any whether it's private, any equity to come in, it has to be good and profitable and with high returns for them. These returns will only come if there are the right policies and the right SOPs. So at this point of time, it's more on intent that is driving the transition. The moment there are right policies, right SOPs, and it becomes, for a private equity, it doesn't matter where they want to invest. All it matters is an ROE, and if there is enough return on equity through right policies, then then you can see at this point of time, these policies need to be formulated. I don't see them on the table.
Yeah, one more question, and then I've been told that just one question, and other questions can be taken offline.
Hi, my name is Srinivas. I build solar power cold rooms to smallholder farmers and deliver that as a service, cooling as a service. My more a comment than a question, but possibly a question.
Only questions.
Question. Okay, let me frame it as a question then. The point is, no, smallholder farmers' incomes are low. there is a variability in the solar itself is intermittent, the crop is intermittent, the farmer income is intermittent, weather is intermittent. So you have all these intermittencies, and then you have to create a structure. No, blended finance, this, that, and the other. That becomes a problem for an entrepreneur like me to put this banking, finance, or VC hat. With all the intelligence on the panel, what is the way around it? I mean, I know.
So I think I'll give you an answer on this since you're talking about micro cold storages. There's a program we are running for putting out 200 of these this year. And there is a structure we have created which doesn't require you to blend anything. So we can talk offline on this. Yeah. I think before the AEEE team can speak, you have raised, but can you just make it 10 seconds? All right, thank you. Thank you for accommodating. Thank you, guys.
Thank you to all the panelists for the insightful discussion. I would now like to request Dr. Bhaskar to present the moderator and the panelists with the token of appreciation.